you still need the human being on top to do that kind of due diligence and have that professional skepticism and manage it. And this is where the role of the human will be, I think, even better, hopefully, because we won't have to do some of these mundane tasks. And actually, for most professions, it should leave them freer to do the real high value advisory work.
In the ever-evolving landscape of construction technology, one innovation stands out as a game changer: artificial intelligence. Now, I could go into the specifics of what is classed as AI and what most class as AI and what is actually things like LLMs, large language models, and the likes. But I won't, as the simplification of classing the newest technology that seems to work magic and produce something from nothing as artificial intelligence works well here in terms of categorisation and a singular point of focus. So let's not split too many hairs about that type of thing here. For all its promises of reshaping how we design, build, and manage construction projects, the majority of us will not have used it beyond creating minimal, basic content or images that don't quite cut it yet. Let's dive into the episode and explore AI's transformative potential, challenges, and real-world applications. Our expert to guide us through this episode is Andrew Knight, global leader and tech lead at RIX, where he's been camped out for the past 13 years. And prior to his role in leading the AI, data, and tech thought leadership and analytics, Andrew managed RIC's relationships with the finance and investment community, working with debt and equity participants, their advisors in law and accountancy, and regulators. Andrew has also enjoyed a long career in IT, starting out by running programs on mainframes using punch cards, and then working through the eras of mini computers, personal computers, and the internet. And now, the world of artificial intelligence, cloud computing, the Internet of Things, IoT, and blockchain are firmly in his sights. In his current role, Andrew is responsible for AI, data, and tech thought leadership and content development, and the adoption of the RICS data standard, RDS, that supports valuation, property measurement, lifecycle costing, building performance, brokerage, and due diligence. Andrew, that's one of my favorite intros, if nothing just for the punch cards alone. Did I miss anything off that? And welcome to the podcast.
Well, no, glad to be on. I don't think so. It is unfortunately, I guess, a reflection of how long I've been working. That there's so much there, and it's funny. I do use the punch card thing, particularly when talking at conferences. I was talking at a conference this week, and it's usually my sort of indication of how old is some of the audience. I ask people to put their hand up if they even know what a punch card is.
Yeah. That's brilliant. Just out of interest, when you're doing that, what's the rough percentage of people that have?
It's pretty small, I guess. It's probably, I mean, yesterday it was a tiny, I think only one person put their hand up of about 60 people, but there's probably normally maybe sort of, I don't know, between 5 and 10% have even heard what it is. But I guess as the current generation grows up, they'll be equally puzzled by the concept of a floppy disk, I suspect. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I never used punch cards, but I certainly know what they are, and yeah, I'm more floppy disk era than anything, I would say, which is always interesting. You know, you talk about cassettes and things like that as well, which you start to show you. When we talk about those types of things, I always tell a very brief story. In one of my previous roles, we were just chatting in the office. And I mentioned Monty Python. I can't remember in what context, but I mentioned Monty Python, and someone in the office said, "Who's that?" And it was just, oh, okay, we're at that age now, are we?
And yeah, ironically, that person probably might be, or be coding in Python and don't realize that that's the reason it's called Python.
yeah, exactly. They've got more affinity with that than they have the comedy team. So comedy group. Anyway, we digress. So let's move from punch cards to AI, shall we?
Indeed.
So okay, this is the first thing that we're going to talk about here. as it continues to advance, its integration into construction processes holds promise for improving efficiency, accuracy, and safety, from design and planning to project management and maintenance. AI applications are reshaping how construction projects are conceptualized, executed, and maintained. But for the uninitiated, which I'd say the majority of with people within construction probably are in terms of what AI actually is and what it does, this can seem complex and daunting. In a recent article by Rix, James Garner, Senior Director at Gleeds and Global Head of Data, Insights and Analytics, stated, as the price point comes down, costs are less of a barrier, less of a concern. In my experience, it is the culture and people side that can be tougher to change than the tech. So, with that in mind, let's start by getting your best advice for those organizations that are ready to integrate AI into their processes. What do we need to do here?
Well, I suppose I think in a funny way, despite the fact we're talking about technology, I think we need to talk about business issues and problems and what we're trying to achieve here rather
Mm,
than actually dive into the tech. Because my view is that this is not about tech for tech's sake, it's tech as a means to an end. So it's thinking about what kind of processes, what kind of challenges, what kind of document management issues, what kind of cost benchmarking, what kind of scheduling issues might you have where AI may be a solution for that. Because AI, in its simplest terms, is around making predictions, optimizing processes,
mm,
producing content, making decisions in an automated way. And to do that, it needs good quality data. So almost your first step is, do you have a data strategy? Do you know about the data that you have and you need? And is it of sufficient quality? Is it of sufficient scale and depth to actually support AI? Because AI is not magic. It needs good data to operate on and to be trained on. And therefore, almost your first stages are thinking about your business issues, your process issues, and then thinking about the scale and quality and data that you've got.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? In that, where particularly within the AI field, it's never um, it's never just let's use this thing. It's always it's same in marketing. It's the same in finance, and it's the same in pretty much any walk of life. It never starts with that application or that thing. It's very much we need that foundation. We need those foundations solidified and make sure that they are correct before we even dream of utilizing any kind of tech or using these things that we know about to help us in our organization.
Yeah, that's very true, and I think that word foundation is very important. And I think also, as James, who I know well, said in that article, you do need to think about the culture and the kind of mindset of the
Mm,
organisation and its general kind of view of innovation here, because it is around thinking how can we do things better, and that may well be either to increase profits or save costs or improve the service to clients or in that way. But it is around thinking how can we innovate, and then what are the right tools to support that innovation. So
mm,
it is almost, the tech is almost the last piece. It's really more about thinking about processes and what do we need to do and what data we have available, rather than jumping straight into tech. And I think also the other challenge to avoid is to try to kind of boil the ocean, as the jargon goes, and maybe take simpler steps and look at some interventions where you think technology may be the solution, test those out, experiment, play with it, if I can use that phrase, see some
mm.
return on investment, and then take your next step rather than try and re-engineer an entire business, an entire process.
Yeah, for sure. I want to move on to challenges now, and obviously there's clear benefits of using AI if we get the foundations right. But implementing the tech can pose various challenges, particularly within construction. Um, and these may include things like, and you'll probably want to talk about these things in a bit more detail, but data accessibility, the quality of that data, workforce training, integration with existing systems, which can be tricky and complex, and concerns around privacy and security. And we'll come on to like the ethics a little bit later on. Now, according to Forbes, in the UK, there's a huge drop between large companies and small companies incorporating at least one AI technology. And that's around about 70% to 15%, respectively, which is probably a good reference point for where construction industry is, being made up of large and small organizations, but being more reliant on the smaller organizations to
Hmm.
do a lot of the work. So overcoming these hurdles is essential for maximizing the effectiveness and adoption of AI. And I'd just like to dig a little deeper into these challenges. So, from your perspective, what are the main challenges that we face, I suppose, as an industry as a whole, in implementing AI?
Well, as we've touched on already, I mean, data is one of those foundational challenges, and I guess also we have to be honest that because construction is a very fragmented sector in the sense that
Mm,
there are many operators in it, and even on a particular project, you'll have many tiers, as you know, many participants. So we do have a challenge around sharing data and making data available in standardized formats in a common format, and having that data flow between the participants to give us enough data for AI to do its work. And I think we've also got to be realistic that there'll be some situations where AI will not be the right solution. We don't have the
mm,
volume of data. It simply won't be an appropriate mechanism for us to use. But I think once again, it's about thinking about what are the challenges that we want to fix using technology. And bear in mind, in many cases, AI will be perhaps one relatively small part of an overall application. It may be, for instance, part of a scheduling system. It might be part of the document management that looks at the way you document all the contracts. It might be part of the system that just helps you take off quantities. So it may not be an entire AI application. So I think there's an educational challenge here about realizing what AI is and what it isn't, and how it may be simply just one little part of an overall package that you're buying. And I guess
mm,
one of the big challenges, obviously, if you're a very large organization, you may be fortunate enough to have your own internal development teams who will build these models, build these applications, but more likely than not, you'll be really in a procurement mode here of actually being sold to and having to think, well, we think that there is an issue here we can solve with an AI application, or an application that has an element of AI in it. And we're now into that hopefully intelligent customer mode. So I think the biggest challenge is around understanding whether we have the data, and then the education, awareness, and knowledge in house to be that smart, intelligent customer to say, well, yeah, let's go out into the market and find out what's available, understand the pros and cons of all those solutions, and see how we can then, back to the classic challenge of integrate that with our existing system. So
mm.
I think it is, a lot of it is around, and we've used the word foundational already, getting to understand what AI can and cannot do, what applications are out there, and see whether those applications really do work with you as a company. And in some respects, it's perhaps no different from buying software for the last 10, 30, 40 years. You've got to look at the fitness of it, the training requirements, the data requirements, and say, is this the right application for us? And I guess the additional complexity in the construction sector is the fact that this needs to work with different platforms for different parts of the supply chain, and that broader integration piece. So I think it's something that people need to explore and start doing, but do it with their eyes wide open and think about these challenges of, which we're probably going to be procuring this. Therefore, how do we put ourselves in a situation where we can be that intelligent customer?
Yeah, you mentioned that supply chain, and you mentioned common platform, or platforms, in terms of people using the same, or people using data in the same kind of way. Do you think that's possible in the fragmented industry that we work in? Like you said, there's so many different tiers and so many different organizations and sectors within the industry that use different types of data for different reasons. Do you think that mecca can kind of be achieved at some point in the future?
I think, ironically, AI may be part of that solution, because increasingly what AI can be very powerful at doing is extracting data from different formats,
Mm,
converting it from one format to the next. And by different formats, I mean the kind of, the profound problem that we have across a lot of the built environment, where so much of our data is not in a structured format. It's a PDF, or it's a Word document, or it's an email. And so I think one of the promises of AI is that sort of document extraction, document management, where actually it can be part of that solution, and that
mm,
recognizing that we will not have common standards necessarily between participants, that we need, but that we still need to be able to share and extract information from those different participants and turn them into usable data and information. So I think, ironically, AI will be part of that solution to deal with the world as we find it, not the world as we would like it, because we will be dealing with documents in different formats from different parts of the supply chain for a long time. And I think it's probably unrealistic to assume that we're all going to coalesce around standard formats of even cost benchmarking or whatever it may be. There are various different formats out there in terms of people putting different work breakdowns together and different costing structures. But I think AI may well be part of that solution.
Okay, that's interesting and also good to know. I just want to cover focus on sort of the building part of it, the building design part of it, and as we've seen, AI is driving innovation in building design. It's helping architects and engineers explore new possibilities, push boundaries from what we'd class as a traditional design process. According to an article by Maintenance and Engineering, AI within HVAC alone has been found to deliver energy cost savings of around 30%, and also the same in terms of a carbon footprint reduction. Through generative design to enhance sustainability, AI may help create structures that are both functional and aesthetically pleasing. Could you talk us through how it's being deployed within a building design process at all?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting topic generally. I talked to a lot of people in this kind of either parametric design or kind of more conceptual design. And I think what's interesting is and this is anecdotal to a large extent here, Peter, in terms of how it may be working in different practices. But ironically enough, people seem to be using it for kind of, as you said, conceptual design, but still going back to, if we can use the phrase, traditional methods of actually designing the final structure, in the sense of actually working with clients, looking at ideas, using generative AI particularly to kind of imagine what these structures might look like, but then still using obviously BIM and other what we could call traditional approaches to actually do the design function. It was interesting, I was talking to one architect where they said, well, yes, we're using it a lot to generate ideas for our clients, but then we're almost going back to pen and paper to do the actual finished piece. And I guess we also have to be sort of mindful. I was talking to a structural engineer recently where, yes, AI had produced this, in theory, this steel structure, but actually he said it was kind of technically correct, but also technically totally wrong. So I think we also have to be aware that there's still this really important role of the various disciplines, whether it's civil, structural engineer, etc., to make sure that what is being created by AI is actually something that is realistic and can be constructed. So I think it's certainly giving some useful input, but I think there's still that real need for the real human experts to oversee this piece. I mean, you mentioned obviously from a kind of an operational perspective, there are huge opportunities for AI in terms of energy management, and we may well touch on that later. But I think from the kind of design process, it's still an interesting blend here, I think, of AI producing concepts and professionals really then honing them down into realistic options that can be built and are practical and actually do work. But certainly, that there's some power in the kind of design ideas and floor plate management and those things. But I think it's still reasonably early days from the kind of conversations I've had.
So how long do you feel it would take, say, let me rephrase that. How far off are we letting let's for layman's terms a computer design a house that you yourself would be comfortable living in without any human interaction in terms of the actual just design of it?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. I mean, I think it's hard to sort of argue against the pace of change that we're seeing, particularly in some of these generative AI models and their power. The reason I hesitate is I think we're still talking about spaces that people want to live in. And so whilst there might be a technically correct generative design, I still wonder whether people still want to think through options and sit down with professionals and actually decide, well, yes, you've created something that is technically correct, but it doesn't work for me at a kind of human operational level. So I suspect that I don't think we'll be delegating full design to AI for some time, if only because I think of that kind of consultative iterative process, and also, I'm not an architect, but there is still a huge degree of creativity in what
Yeah.
architects do, and I think generative AI is probably never going to have the idiosyncrasies almost of the human condition in terms of that sort of that context piece of
Hmm.
positioning a building in a particular landscape, for example. Um, Having said that, you might think of an example of something as dare I say, as soulless as a data center, where that's perhaps less of an issue, where you're physically just creating a very functional space in that way, which is, if you think of a logistics site, you probably could have a situation where generative AI could produce a number of options for an optimized logistics park, for example, or a data center, just on a very kind of cold functional basis. But for
Yeah.
many of our spaces, it's not necessarily just about function, it's about style and form as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on focusing on the style and form for a second, I noticed that two things really. Yesterday, I saw a post that said PSG, Paris Saint-Germain, the
Mm.
football team, had used AI for their latest kit release, and it was all AI generated the images. For somebody from the outside looking in, it's really difficult to see the differences. But I very much feel if you're in that space, I was looking at the images and I thought, well, yeah, the badge is a little bit skew if it's
Yeah,
slightly off, and you just notice those little intricacies that it just can't handle or notice or deal with at the moment. So I think everyone's jobs are pretty safe for the moment. I always say AI with HI, so it's artificial intelligence plus human intelligence is where we're at.
exactly. Yeah, and we're still fundamentally talking about spaces for people to live, work, play in, and I
Hmm.
think there is still that. And I say I use again, a one-off conversation I had with an architect where they said that they were using generative AI as a wonderfully powerful tool for concepts, but they were
Mm,
almost going back to basics when it came to their client had now decided roughly what they wanted, and now they went back to quite a traditional design process to actually generate the final option. But they were using the productivity gains of showing the client 5 or 6 options very quickly because they'd
yeah.
been generated quickly, but they were almost stimulus material rather than the
Hmm.
final model.
Yeah, working alongside it. I think Chat GPT's got a lot to answer for, but I feel that the it's stealing our jobs and we're all going to be out of a profession is just starting to settle now, and we're seeing that it's same as radio to TV, same as the internet, etc., etc. All these new advances in tech, it started to settle down. Like, oh, okay, so we as humans actually utilize this to improve certain elements of working or social life.
Exactly.
That's how it's going to work.
Yeah, yeah. I think to use the sort of phrase, I think that it is key that the humans remain in the driving seat. Not only
Mm,
it's not job protection per se in that way, but I think it's because we do have genuine value to add
yeah.
that AI will augment what we do, not the other way around. So.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think a lot of media outlets would like us to believe it's the opposite to that,
Yeah,
and it is. Yeah, it is the other way around. Okay, cool. Let's move on to that kind of operational side, maintenance and sort of asset management. So, predictive maintenance powered by AI can and is transforming asset management practices, offering the potential to minimize downtime, extend asset lifespan, optimize maintenance schedules, and that type of thing. 39% of participants in a recent survey by Autodesk cited using AI for mundane automated tasks, which kind of links to what we were just talking about. And this highlights the opportunity to make some real inroads into this sector of construction. So, with this in mind, what are your thoughts on how AI can enhance the use of buildings once they're up and once we're in them?
yeah. I mean, I think this is almost one of the when I say most advanced, as in there's a lot of activity and a lot of return on investment already being generated here, and I
Mm,
think this is another indication where despite the media's best efforts to sort of paint a picture of sort of Terminator 2 here, AI is very good at prosaic stuff. It's very good at optimizing your HVAC, and you can see, I think you mentioned it earlier in our conversation, quite large percentage savings just on the fact that by linking it to various sensors or your Wi-Fi hubs, you can simply just optimize your HVAC usage based on building occupancy and save an awful lot of money and energy. The predictive maintenance is very good because effectively not only can it take direct signals from your machines in terms of maintenance and duty cycles, it can listen, it can learn about vibrations and noises that then were precursors of failure. So it's not, when I say it's not exciting, what I mean by that, it's not scary, but it's just really useful stuff where you can use sensors, you can use data to learn about machines, to learn about your M&E, and just run your building better, more efficiently, and as I say, save money and also reduce the operational carbon. So there's a huge opportunity here to use, I think, fairly well established machine learning. And this is not generative AI per se in terms of the recent wave. This is well-established machine learning that can simply interpret and understand how your building is operating and optimize a lot of these systems. And as I say, literally listen to noises and vibrations and obviously take direct sensor readings from various machines to understand how healthy they are and just make sure that you manage that building better. So huge opportunity there, a lot of kind of money on the table, to use that horrible phrase, to make sure that we operate the buildings better. And I think it does, it clearly links back into the construction cycle, and not so much about AI, but just BIM in terms of having a proper asset register to make sure that when we hand buildings across to the operation cycle, we've got a full smart building, the various sensors that are required, and a good asset register from a digital point of view to make sure we know what we've got and know what we need to manage and what to replace and what the life cycle and duty cycle of these items are. And as I say, AI is already delivering, I think, a lot of real return on investment here, once again in something that doesn't feel terribly exciting, but actually it's just really important stuff to make our buildings more efficient.
And that's the funny thing when we start to talk about AI and new tech, is that it'll do the boring things, or what we potentially class as boring, very, very, very well.
Exactly.
But no one wants to talk about that. They want to talk about Terminator 2 and Wall-E and how that's going to be our life going forward. It's quite funny that the efficiencies in making our life better is in that stuff that. It's almost behind the scenes AI, isn't it? Rather than the front facing AI,
well, it
which
is,
is what we see.
And almost back to the construction cycle, it's about AI helping us with document management and extracting and summarizing and being that co-pilot, which will become, I think, a very pervasive sort of world for us now, where it'll be, somebody described it, at the risk of being rude to interns, as being like having a free intern. It's somebody just to help you record meeting notes, produce some draft action notes from a meeting, summarize some documents, summarize a report, but you still need the human being on top to do that kind of due diligence and have that professional skepticism and manage it. But actually it is about, and this is where the role of the human will be, I think, even better, hopefully, because we won't have to do some of these mundane tasks, or we'll have a little helper to help us. And actually for most professions, it should leave them freer to do the real high value advisory work, the critical analysis, the stuff that actually we're better at. And I think that's why we should embrace AI as this, in a funny way, tool that will do the mundane stuff for us, rather than the stuff that the media would like to talk about, which is the Terminator 2 taking over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as fun and exciting as people make out, or want you to believe. Okay, so I just want to turn the conversation to, I suppose, slowing down the pace of adoption in a strange way. In the same Autodesk survey that I mentioned previously, 66% of construction industry leaders agree that in 2 to 3 years, AI will be essential to their business. With this in mind, I just want to turn to the ethical and regulatory side to finish our chat. From data privacy to algorithm bias to liability and accountability, navigating the ethical and legal implications of AI adoption requires careful consideration and proactive measures to ensure responsible and equitable use of AI tech. Do you think the construction industry is ready in terms of regulation and understanding these types of ethics that come with deploying AI? Or is there more that needs to be done now before we get too ahead of the game?
I think it comes back to perhaps our earlier conversation about the kind of foundation of this, because I think we mustn't sleepwalk into the fact that there are issues with AI, and I guess I quite like, despite the fact we're not part of the regulatory regime anymore, but in terms of the approach the EU have taken, which is about looking at the kind of element of risk here, because if we think about an AI application, and bear in mind, whilst we're talking in the context of sort of construction and the built environment, we've also got to remember that these are general businesses that will be using AI for quite generic purposes, like chatbots for customer service, for example, or for recruitment, dare I say it, or taking meeting notes as we've described. So we need to be thinking about AI not just in a narrow view of the practice area, construction, but also more broadly about how organizations use it. And if we come back to that idea of risk, if we think of a real kind of spectrum here, from something as I would argue, relatively low risk, like using AI to run your HVAC, where the risk is that you spend too much money or people get too hot or too hot or too cold. That's relatively low risk. You're not particularly dealing necessarily with any kind of personal data in that way. The other extreme is you might be thinking, well, okay, we're in a property management situation here. We might want to use AI to try and judge the likelihood of tenants of a multifamily block not paying their rent. So you're into very different contexts there of personal information, potential bias in terms of demographics. So there's a whole spectrum here of risk, and both risk in terms of the people or organizations you might make decisions about and get those decisions wrong and have bias, all the way to the other extent of simply a machine that's running your HVAC. So I think there is a challenge here that we need to think about who would be affected by the decisions that AI might take. Then back to that whole issue of, do we have the right data? Do we understand how there might be biases in data that's particularly going to affect individuals and obviously commercial relationships as well? So it does come back to sort of this educational awareness, intelligent custom piece, where I think the sector does need to think about, if we use AI in a particular context, who's affected? And what's the severity of getting something wrong? And also the basic issue, I think, of being transparent and being clear to everybody who's affected that we are using AI in this particular context. Be clear about the kind of data that's being used to drive that model, because you might be saying that even something like the HVAC, well, we need to know how many people are in the building, but we use AI and we don't know that it's you individually. We just know that there are X people in that part of the building, and that's why the HVAC will be turned on or off. But we can assure you that we don't identify you personally, X, Y, Z. But then again, you might be running a shopping center using computer vision and taking pictures of people and potentially identifying individuals. So it's about thinking through who's affected. Are we being transparent? How is the data being collected? And what is the risk to those affected? And what kind of decisions might we take based on the use of it? And as ever with ethical decisions, just because we can do it technically, is it the right thing to do?
Yeah, that's the key one for me. Is it right? And I suppose we come full circle there, if you think about it, in that you start with the foundations of what are we trying to achieve, and while we're thinking about that, that's another question that we add into there: is it the right thing to do as well? So we've kind of come full circle in our conversation there, which is interesting. Andrew, I'm going to wrap things up here. Thank you so much for your time. I could talk to you all day about this type of thing, because I think one thing that I've discovered in our conversation is that although AI can be seen as this new and fancy thing, the efficiencies and the benefit we're going to see, and we are seeing, is in the mundane and the parts of our lives that we almost just take for granted, that stuff happens and things will happen a lot easier now using things like AI. And I think that's the thing that's been highlighted for me, amongst other things. So once again, thank you so much for joining me and you know, giving us a decent brain dump of everything in construction and AI. From we've gone from punch cards right to the other end, and that's been your career. Absolutely delighted to have you on. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.